City of Lethbridge. Graham Masterton is here from Stantec, who is one of our consultants helping us with the Transit Master Plan. Today I'd like to bring you up to date on where we're at presently with the Transit Master Plan and what we've learned. If you have any questions or concerns with regards to what's on the screens and you can't see it well enough, there is handouts available at the transit desk out in the hallway, as well as it is available online on 100KA on the city website. So today, we've come to the point where we have reviewed what exists. We've looked at what the vision should be, or what we think the vision should be. We've listened to the community and what their thoughts are. And we've come up with some objectives to try to meet those requirements. And we've looked at different ways we can meet those needs through programming. And we wanted to show that to the community and get some feedback on what that might mean. And see if it's a positive feedback or if there's any other issues that we've missed. So the vision statement that we've come up with is down here. You can see that we intended to describe what we're looking at the end of the run out of how transit's going to be. We want it to be inspirational and motivating so that we can try to meet a good outcome for transit overall. And we wanted to get to an endpoint so that in 20 or 30 or 40 years, we still have a very good usable transit system that we can move forward with that's going to be very viable in the future. Okay. So some of the value statement themes that you can see here on the block identify what's going on, and they all come from our integrated community sustainability plan and municipal development plan, as well as we looked at a whole bunch of input from the community itself, things that they thought were important for us to move forward with. And there's a lot of good words in there. So you can't really see this very well, but it talks about the goals and objectives for moving forward. And I won't necessarily read them all to you, but we wanted to help transform Lethbridge into a really good city that uses transit, and that transit helps to churn into a city that's viable for transit routes. We wanted to use transit to meet the customer's time. We want to reduce the time that you're sitting on a bus as much as possible so that you get to where you're going to in a reasonable period of time. We wanted to achieve a community that's prosperous and that we're competitive with other choices, that you come here because transit's a good place, or that Lethbridge is a good place. We can provide good transit, and we're competitive with cars, so we have to provide good service. We take you where you want to go. Right now, you might get on the bus and you go for an hour-long route to get to where you want to go, but it doesn't get you there quick. It doesn't get you exactly where you want to be. So there's a whole bunch of goals in there, and there's objectives on how we're going to meet those goals. So if you go ahead and look at that on the handouts and on the website, that'll help you understand where we're at. Okay. So we had a good review of the existing system, and our frequency on most of our routes is 30 minutes. We do have a couple of peak time routes that are 15 minutes. All of our routes are intended to be scheduled so that they have correlation timing, so they meet at the transfer points. Our bus stops that have high-level boardings, we want to get them where they provide service to the main employment areas, so the people that are going to work can get to work, the people that are going home can get close to home, where they're going shopping, where they're going to schools. Those are the things that are important to us. And we wanted to make sure that we understood that what's going on is who's riding the bus the most. We've done some pretty big surveys to try to understand that. So this is where the system exists today. And going forward, we have some learnings, and I'm going to turn it over to Graham so he can describe some of the stuff that we've discussed and gone from the data.
Thanks, Conrad. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to just walk you through kind of our thought process, what we heard, and how that sort of translates into a draft vision for the future of the city. And we're looking at this point, it's the long distant future. What should it look like? How should it be constructed? And then we'll eventually work backwards into how to get from today to tomorrow. In terms of one of the interesting things we found looking at some of the origin destination information is that around 50% of people that are in one of the three pockets, West Lethbridge, North or South Lethbridge, basically stay there all day long. They don't actually travel outside that area. And then there's a strong movement either between those areas or into downtown. So from a transit perspective, in terms of the way we plan, that tells us, okay, we've got to think of an internal service. So there's service that just stays within that area, doesn't really attempt to go outside, and then there's connecting services. So it's just a little note for as we move forward. Okay, it's something interesting to consider as you start looking at the network. And right now, when you look at the network, it's trying to do both things at the same time with single routes. Some of the questions we were starting to pose at the beginning and have been posed by other folks, can ridership levels be improved? You're doing fairly well for the average size system you are, but we're basically at a plateau in terms of what the existing system can do. So in order to increase ridership, you have to make some changes. When we look at the transfer points, and we looked at the current data of where people board and where they transfer, are the transfer points really destinations, or do they just happen to be where we're forced to take people because they want to transfer between two routes and do some kind of a movement? And trying to then understand what that through movement is becomes important. Looking at the schedule, the frequencies, do all the routes need to be the same? Right now, we've got Route 12 going where they do a University of Lethbridge that does have some peak 15-minute service, but otherwise everything else is the same level of service all day long. And as Conrad noted, the travel times, how do we actually try to reduce those travel times by up to half of what they are today? So some of the questions that were asked of the public at the last session: how do we improve those ridership levels? We did a big questionnaire online to ask a little bit more information. How much time do you spend in the bus? How much time do you think you should spend in the bus? Was there any correlation between those two? And in fact, obviously there was. People would like to spend a lot less time in the bus than they do today. So this is what we actually heard as general notes. Travel time's too long, too many transfers, the transfer time is too long, the frequencies on some of the routes are just not enough. Interestingly, the cost comparison to just parking on the street somewhere. And that typically is when you look at daily out-of-pocket costs, people don't start amortizing their tires and things like that into their daily decision making. It's how much do I plug in a meter, how much do I put in a bus, into a bus to move. Some of the service times, so evenings, weekends, that's pretty typical as the system matures. People want to be able to travel later at night, want to be able to go to a restaurant and have a few drinks and take the bus home rather than driving. Weekends become more popular and more desirable. In terms of big system structure, I think this is one of the interesting ones that came out of it last time, was people were very vocal about making big changes, not incremental changes. So don't just tinker with the system, do something serious with it this time. Because I think the past approaches have been to try to just do little tinkerings. Look at efficient, rapid, and more direct routes. So really looking at some of how the system used to be actually done is what we took away from that. The frequency, length of day, improving the waiting experience, so better facilities. And facilities where you can transfer, but there's other stuff happening around it, so it's less of a concern for you. And then fewer loops, so try to make those routes as straight and directional as possible rather than big long loops that take quite a while or have one-way service. So our main thoughts in terms of designing the system were we wanted to identify those main corridors where we could do that fast and frequent service, so that rapid type of service. How do we connect neighborhoods to local commercial rather than making people come all the way downtown to go back out to a different neighborhood? How do we improve transit facilities and where do we locate them? New developments that are occurring on West Lethbridge and South Lethbridge. How do we actually connect those into the system without having to constantly change the system? So how do we design it so that there's a way that they can connect in without making changes to the rest of the system, which is one of the problems today. And again, as I've noted, just creating that network that allows the city to grow and expand without having to do constant changes. So you have a framework that you can add on to rather than having to constantly change that framework. So what I'm going to walk you through is some layers of service we've put together. And we've called them layers because they're trying to do different things. So, and this is one possible future we found is it's better to go out with an actual plan, and if people comment on a single version, you get better comments back, and it allows us to then move the process along a lot faster than coming back with 5 different proposals and saying which do you like best. So what we mean by frequent transit, this is the higher end services that should be 15 minutes all day at some point, maybe even higher in the peaks, depending on demand. And we've looked at 4 different connectors. 2 in connecting North and South Lethbridge, 1 within West Lethbridge, and then a connector along Lookout Drive that connects West Lethbridge into downtown and then across. And part of what we're looking at is trying to do north-south, east-west, big movements where you're allowing a single transfer on an L system, and then the next layer down starts to complement those. So you create a sort of a network that allows you to move around quite quickly without having to go into downtown necessarily to go back out again. And so that starts to look at that notion of staying in your own community as well as those connectors. A couple of the interesting ones we're looking at is whether or not we want to route all the way through downtown with a new facility on 5th Avenue. Do we want to loop buses through downtown, or do we want to just take them into the facility and then back out again, and people, they either walk or we have a local service. So when you look at the very bottom, there's a couple of common areas that we're looking for interest in. The same at Lethbridge College. Do we take every single bus down into the loop and back out, or do we stay half a block away and allow people to walk but make faster connections? A couple of interesting areas to think about. So that's the frequent layer. The next layer down will be local transit. So it's similar to frequent transit in that you're trying to stay as focused as you can, but there may be aspects that say, you know what we're trying to do, as in the green one on West Lethbridge, or sorry, South Lethbridge, is can we get people from their community directly to services and then back to the community without having to go somewhere else and come back? So how do we get them locally? Are there corridors that are pretty good corridors, but maybe they're not that rapid, frequent corridor than the next level down, and they could develop in the future? So we've added a few of those in. In North Lethbridge, we started to look at how do we create cross connections that allow people to make a simple L-shaped movement and they can get in and out of their community fast to where they want to go rather than a long loop and down. It's a little hard to see in this one, you have to go probably up to see the maps, but community transit then is that recognition that there's some services, and this is where it starts to tie in a little bit of the Access-a-Ride, that their whole key is just to move people around a local community to go to local services where you're not in a hurry to do anything. It's daytime service. It could be for older folks that don't necessarily need Access-a-Ride, but don't want to use the existing system, or they don't have that walk distance ability. And so looking at how do we take little areas that are really hard to serve and maybe put a smaller bus or a van or some other kind of service in there to allow a little bit of movement around, to go to your doctor's office, go grocery shopping a couple times a week without having to divert large routes through those areas. The other challenge we've had is obviously the industrial area, looking at the industrial connector. How do we actually try to get service in there with good connections at sort of the lowest cost possible? So provide the opportunity, but not necessarily have to bring people all the way downtown, or and knowing that we're fairly limited in terms of our way in and out of the industrial area if we're trying to avoid railroad tracks. Facilities is a big part of all this. Without the right facilities, you can't do the transfers in the right place, or you're looping through residential streets trying to turn buses around and go back. And so what we've looked at is we've got a new proposed facility that the city's gone out to a Greenfield funding application for downtown, which would allow everything to come together in a newer facility with some park and ride, regional parking, and then looking at our existing north terminal, but a new northern terminal when that community builds out, a new terminal somewhere in the south that allows us to bring about 5 or 6 different routes together in a particular area, and then it allows us to act as a point to go to new communities as we go south, rather than having to continually extend routes and make them longer and longer and longer. We also recognize, I think, that in addition to University of Lethbridge, the focal point of West Lethbridge is changing with the new community facilities, and that we're going to need something out there as that continues to grow west and south and north. Where the edge of the city is today is going to be the center of West Lethbridge in the future. And so you have to plan for something today that allows us an ability to easily get to all these various neighborhoods. So when you bring it all together, it starts to make a little more sense than the layers individually. But really the goal is to try to move people as fast and frequent as we can on higher level services, provide connecting opportunities on local and community services, provide facilities in the right place and really start to think about how does the growth of the city then connect into that spinal network without having to change what's existing there once it's in place. So that's it for the conventional system. I'm just going to walk through a few slides on Access-a-Ride. Connor.
Thanks. So part of the mandate for the study was to not just look at conventional transit, but was to also look at the other services we provide to the community, Access-a-Ride, which is there to provide services to those people that have a difficult time or cannot use conventional transit. They can't walk the distance to get to transit, or they're impaired or disabled in some way that prevents them from using the regular transit service. So some of the strengths and weaknesses we looked at in the way that this system works. And it shows, where our job is to serve and provide that mobility to the disabled and to those that are unable to ride the bus. Right now we have 22 buses. And the service is more or less similar to regular transit. It's slightly less over time, but we have a huge clientele. Actually, our clientele is probably bigger than any city our size, or even almost double our size. So we're doing really good based on what we're providing, but we're not doing it as well as we could. So that's some of the immediate findings that we had, and I think that it'll become clear that there's a lot of things we can do to improve the service. So I'll let Graham move forward with that.
All right, we're just going to quickly run through some of the findings, and as Conrad noted, we looked at systems of various similar sized populations, and we look at the annual trips. Lethbridge stands out considerably as having at least double what you expect, if not sometimes triple what you expect from a city the same size. Cost per trip is pretty good, so it's an indicator that they're doing a lot of big group trips, and that's also one of the challenges with the system. So system strengths, the fleet allocation obviously matches the ridership. There's some work on salary parity with the conventional system that will slow down or reduce operator turnover. The program oversight has changed over the last couple of years, which is awesome. And some of the same-day service availability has been created, which is if you call in that day, you might be able to get a trip that day. Some of the weaknesses and really why it shows up as such high ridership, there's two sort of issues. One is the eligibility screening. It's probably not at the industry standards of today. There's been a lot of work in North America about what is accessible services, what community they're supposed to serve, how can we get people onto the conventional bus. Access-a-Ride is far more expensive to put out there than a conventional service. And so trying to find services that meet the needs. The other thing we find in looking at the Lethbridge system is it's a highly it's subscription trips, and what that means is it's group trips to adult daycare, things like that. The bus is full, it takes a big complement, but then it's not available for individuals to call in and use. So typically you would see 30% subscription and 70% on single on-demand. In Lethbridge, it's completely the opposite. And so what it just says is that in terms of trying to track folks that want to use the system, they can get discouraged because they just can't get through, they can't make a booking because pretty much it's booked up all the time. So some short-term recommendations are really take a look, hard look at the eligibility policies and the protocols. There's a bunch of other ones about no-show policies and that are very specific. The other side is to try to make, when you're changing the eligibility, part of what we're trying to do on the conventional side is then make it conventional more accessible to folks that can use it, like a lot of these community-based services, going on to faster services, so that you have to kind of attack it two ways at the same time. You can't just enforce new eligibility and then not allow some opportunity to move around the conventional system. So there's some very specific recommendations about no-show policies, changing the user's guide, which is fairly old at this point, and then just taking a look at the fare structure for both conventional and Access-a-Ride. In terms of the long-term recommendations, it's taking a look at fleet size. The fleet really is dictated right now by those large trips that have to occur. On the smaller trips, you've got a fairly large vehicle taking one or two people. So there's a lot of places that look different ways to do that, smaller vehicles for those kind of trips. Taxi options for low demand services. And just taking a look at some of the cost sharing in the U.S. Subscription trips are shared based on what they're for. So if it's hospital-based service, that gets paid through healthcare. If it's disability or things like that, it gets paid a different way. Canada hasn't really gone down that road yet. It's a lot of downloading onto the system, but it's something that I think that people are talking about in terms of just trying to keep the costs reasonable. So with that, thank you. Take any questions, and as we said, there's handouts outside there that have each of the slides. They'll be up online as well on the city website. We'll have to answer any questions.
Yeah, and actually, what I'd like to do is, we have another presentation in here for 100K at noon, so what